She was barefoot, in her pajamas, and on the phone with 911, trying to help someone she thought was in danger. But when the police arrived, it was her who ended up dead. Justine Damond thought she was doing the right thing. It was a quiet summer night in Minneapolis. She heard a woman screaming behind her house, and, like any good neighbor, she called for help. But minutes later, a police cruiser rolled down the alley, and in less than 10 seconds, a single shot rang out. That one bullet didn't just kill Justine. It shattered trust, ignited international outrage, and exposed the kind of systemic failures that no longer can be ignored. The officer who pulled the trigger? A young, fast-tracked cop with prior complaints and a badge he might not have been ready for. But why did he shoot? Why wasn't his body cam on? And why, of all things, did the system react so differently than it had in other police shootings? Welcome to a case that turned the justice system upside down and left two families shattered on opposite sides of a bullet. This is Death Row Diaries. Don't forget to hit subscribe. July 15th, 2017. It was just after 11:30 p.m. when Justine Damond picked up her phone and dialed 911. She sounded calm but concerned. Something strange was happening outside her home in the quiet Fulton neighborhood of Minneapolis. From her window, she thought she heard a woman's voice, maybe someone in trouble, maybe someone being attacked. She made two calls, one at 11:27 and another at 11:35. In both, she described what sounded like a woman screaming behind her house. She wasn't dramatic, she wasn't frantic, just someone trying to help. Officers were dispatched, Mohamed Noor and his partner, Matthew Harity. They weren't running sirens, no flashing lights, just a slow patrol down a quiet alleyway in their police-issued Ford Explorer, lights off, coasting past garages and trash bins. This was standard for a low-priority call. They weren't expecting trouble. As they drove through the alley, they found nothing. No suspects, no screaming, nothing unusual at all. Harity, behind the wheel, typed Code 4 into their onboard system, police shorthand for all clear. They were about to leave the scene. But then, a loud bang. Harity later said he was startled. Something had slammed against the squad car, though he couldn't tell what. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just a raccoon or a branch. But suddenly, a figure appeared at his driver's side window. It was Justine Damond. She had walked barefoot from her house in the dark, hoping to talk to the officers, maybe clarify the situation. She had no weapon. She wasn't threatening. She just wanted to help. Harity reached for his weapon, but didn't fire. Noor, sitting in the passenger seat, did. One shot, through the open driver's side window. That single bullet tore into Justine's abdomen. She collapsed in the alley. She would die just 20 minutes later. The officers jumped out, tried CPR, called for paramedics, but it was too late. The woman who had called for help was now the victim of a police shooting, one that would ignite global outrage and expose deep flaws within the department. What shocked the public wasn't just that Justine had been shot, it was how. Unarmed, unthreatening, approaching the officers slowly in her sleepwear. Noor claimed he fired because he believed his partner was in danger, but no weapon was found on or near Justine. No signs of aggression, no signs of a threat. And neither officer had their body cams turned on. There was no video, no audio, no proof of what really happened, just two conflicting stories and one lifeless body. Justine Maria Damond wasn't a criminal. She wasn't unstable. She wasn't involved in anything dangerous. She was, by all accounts, the kind of person people trusted instinctively. Born in Sydney, Australia in 1977, she had a background that would surprise most. After graduating from the University of Sydney as a veterinarian, she transitioned into a more holistic path, working as a yoga instructor, meditation coach, and spiritual healer. Those who knew her described her as deeply compassionate and calm. She believed in energy, mindfulness, and helping others tap into their emotional centers. She taught people how to process trauma, not cause it. She met Justine Damond, a Minneapolis-based executive at a neuroscience workshop. They connected instantly. They got engaged in December 2014 and planned to marry in August 2017, just a few weeks after the shooting. She had already taken his surname in anticipation. Justine was also a dual citizen. Her father was American, giving her a second home in the United States. But her roots and her heart remained grounded in Australia. She loved the outdoors, her friends, her work. She was the kind of person who brought peace into rooms simply by being there. That's what made her death so hard to understand. The fact that someone like her, educated, compassionate, well-connected, white, and unarmed, could be killed by police while trying to help. That terrified people. In the aftermath, vigils popped up across Minneapolis and Sydney. Her fiancé, Don, was devastated. Her father, John, couldn't comprehend how an act of kindness had ended in a fatal shooting. In her honor, people gathered at beaches, held silent walks, and lit candles in her memory. Her death became not just a local tragedy, but an international scandal. But there was another side to the story, and all eyes were turning to the man who pulled the trigger. Mohamed Noor wasn't your typical police officer, and that's exactly why his story got complicated. Born in Somalia in 1985, Noor immigrated to the United States and eventually became one of the first Somali-American officers in the Minneapolis Police Department. His hiring was celebrated by the mayor, praised by local leaders, and held up as a shining example of diversity in law enforcement. The Somali community in Minneapolis, one of the largest in the U.S., saw Noor as a symbol of hope and representation. Finally, someone from their background had made it into the ranks. But behind the polished image were warning signs. Noor had joined the force through a 7-month cadet program designed to fast-track college-educated candidates into police roles. While technically legitimate, critics argued the program cut corners, prioritizing speed over experience. In just under 2 years on the job, Noor had already racked up 3 formal complaints. 1 was dismissed. 2 were still pending by the time of the shooting. Worse, he was the subject of an ongoing civil suit from May 2017, just 2 months before the shooting, accused of assaulting a woman while on duty. Then came the revelations from inside the department. 2 psychiatrists had raised red flags about Noor's psychological readiness years earlier. They believed he wasn't emotionally equipped to handle high-pressure police work. Other officers had voiced similar concerns. Even more troubling, just weeks before the shooting, Noor had reportedly pulled his gun on a driver during a minor traffic stop, pointing it directly at his head. The incident went mostly under the radar, but in hindsight, it seemed like a warning of what was to come. Noor's defenders said he was being scapegoated, that he was a product of a broken system, a rushed training process, and unrealistic diversity expectations. But others saw a man who never should have worn the badge in the first place. His record was messy, his behavior unpredictable, and yet somehow he had been cleared to patrol the streets, armed and authorized to use deadly force. Then came the most damning detail of all.
When Noor fired the shot that killed Justine Damond, he claimed he had feared for his partner's life. But even his partner didn't shoot. In fact, Matthew Harity admitted he was startled, but had seen no reason to fire. Noor, on the other hand, claimed he sensed an ambush, despite never seeing a weapon or even identifying a threat. It raised a terrifying question. Was this officer so unprepared, so unstable, that he mistook a barefoot woman for a lethal attacker? And if so, how did he make it past training? Within hours of Justine's death, Minneapolis police were scrambling. The media descended, activists mobilized, and the public demanded answers. But what they got, instead, were more questions. First, the body cams. Neither Noor nor Harity had theirs on during the incident. Despite the department adopting body cams in 2016, the policy wasn't enforced consistently. Officers could choose when to activate them, and in this case, they didn't. There was no footage of the shooting, no audio, no verified sequence of events. Even worse, shortly after the shooting, investigators from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension obtained a second search warrant, not for the squad car or Noor's gear, but for Justine Damond's home. They claimed they were looking for bodily fluids, controlled substances, and writings. Many saw this as victim blaming. A woman had just been killed by police, and instead of investigating the shooter, they raided her home. Meanwhile, Noor refused to speak with investigators, invoking his Fifth Amendment right. Harity gave a statement, but it raised eyebrows. He claimed they had been spooked, that there was a loud bang and a figure appeared at the window, but he hadn't seen a weapon. He hadn't fired. That meant Noor had fired purely based on fear, not evidence. Experts weighed in. Use of force specialists said the shooting was objectively unreasonable. Fingerprint analysis revealed that Justine never touched the squad car, undermining claims that she slapped it. Minneapolis Police Chief Janae Harto returned from vacation 4 days later and publicly stated Justine didn't have to die. But the damage was done. The public no longer trusted the narrative. The outrage was mounting. In April 2019, nearly 2 years after the fatal shooting, Mohamed Noor stood trial for the death of Justine Damond. The charges were severe and unprecedented: third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, and second-degree murder. Noor had already been fired from the Minneapolis Police Department and was out on bail.
Prosecutors painted a vivid picture of recklessness and disregard. Their argument was chilling in its simplicity. Noor had no legal justification for shooting Justine Damond. She had committed no crime, posed no threat, and in fact had summoned police herself out of concern for another woman she believed was in danger. They alleged that Noor had acted with a depraved mind, firing without confirming a threat, essentially pulling the trigger in panic. But the defense pushed back fiercely. They argued that Noor had reasonably feared for his life and that of his partner, Officer Harity. According to them, they heard a thump on the squad car, saw a shadowy figure approach in the dark alley, and Noor reacted within seconds, shooting to protect his partner. He didn't have the luxury of hindsight. This was a split-second decision in a chaotic situation, the defense argued. Noor took the stand himself, a rare move for a defendant in a murder trial, especially a police officer. Through tears, he described feeling horrified when he realized he had shot an unarmed woman. He said he fired to protect Harity, fearing an ambush. But what stood out most during the trial was not just the legal technicalities, it was the emotional testimonies. John Ruschik, Justine's father, testified. I have no doubt that she was trying to help someone that night. That's who she was, and now she's gone." The jury deliberated for over 11 hours across 2 days, and on April 30th, 2019, they delivered a verdict that sent shockwaves across the nation. Guilty of third-degree murder. Guilty of second-degree manslaughter. Not guilty of second-degree murder. Mohamed Noor became the first Minnesota police officer convicted of murder for an on-duty killing. His sentencing followed 2 months later. On June 7, 2019, Noor stood before the judge in his blue prison jumpsuit. He offered an emotional apology to Justine's family. "I caused this tragedy, and it is my burden. I wish I could relieve that burden others feel from the loss I caused." But Hennepin County Judge Catherine Quaintance wasn't swayed. She acknowledged Noor's clean record, remorse, and community support. But she also underscored that his actions were wrong and criminal. She sentenced him to 12.5 years in prison. As the gavel struck, it signaled a historic moment. A black Somali-American cop had just been convicted for killing a white woman, and for many, the ironies were hard to ignore. The Noor verdict rippled far beyond the courtroom. For some, it was seen as long overdue accountability, a rare instance where a police officer was held responsible for using deadly force without justification. But for others, especially within the Black and Somali-American communities, the case felt disturbingly hypocritical. Why Noor? Why this case? In a country where white officers have repeatedly walked free after killing unarmed black or brown civilians, why was Noor, a black Muslim immigrant, the one convicted for killing a white woman? Activists pointed to case after case of police violence, particularly in Minneapolis, Philando Castile in nearby Falcon Heights, Jamar Clark, and others, where officers had not been charged or were acquitted. Yet here, for the first time, the full weight of the justice system came crashing down on a man of color who had shot a white woman. As Jaylani Hussein, executive director of CARE Minnesota, said, "This was not justice. This was the criminal justice system saying, we will only apply these standards when it's a black officer killing a white woman." Even some police unions found the verdict troubling, fearing it would have a chilling effect on officer decision-making in high-stress situations. But others, however, believed Noor's actions were so egregious and against protocol that the verdict was justified.
Meanwhile, Justine Damond's family pursued a civil lawsuit against the city. In May 2019, the Minneapolis City Council approved a record $20 million settlement, one of the largest in U.S. police shooting cases. Her fiancé, Don Damond, spoke after the settlement. "No amount of money can bring her back, but maybe this can spark change, accountability, and prevent the next innocent person from being killed." And yet, it wouldn't. Just a year later, in the same city, George Floyd would be murdered by Officer Derek Chauvin, and suddenly the Noor case looked even more glaring. 2 cases, 2 dead civilians, 2 officers, but wildly different outcomes. Mohamed Noor didn't fade into obscurity after his conviction. His legal team quickly appealed the verdict, and their argument centered on the third-degree murder conviction. According to Minnesota law, third-degree murder applies when a person acts with a depraved mind, without regard to human life, and causes death to someone who wasn't specifically targeted. Noor's attorneys argued that this didn't fit, He fired directly at a perceived threat. There was no indifference to life in general. He had targeted one individual, not fired randomly into a crowd. Their appeal gathered steam after the Minnesota Supreme Court reversed another third-degree murder conviction in a separate high-profile case involving Derek Chauvin. The precedent set there applied directly to Noor. On September 15, 2021, the state Supreme Court vacated Noor's third-degree murder conviction. That was a big win. However, he wasn't off the hook. He was still convicted of second-degree manslaughter, which carried a maximum sentence of 10 years. He was resentenced to 57 months, 4 years and 9 months in prison. Given time already served, he was eligible for supervised release in June 2022. He was quietly released from prison in October 2022 and deported to a federal immigration detention facility while his legal status was being reviewed, since his citizenship path had been tied to his job with the MPD. And so, the former officer who once wore a badge with pride was now a free man, but with a life forever changed. From celebrated trailblazer to convicted killer, Noor's story became one of the most polarizing law enforcement sagas in modern U.S. history. The legacy of the Mohamed Noor case remains complex and unsettled. On one hand, Justine Damond's name now stands among the many tragic examples of civilians killed in questionable police encounters. Her story is remembered with candlelight vigils, neighborhood murals, and reforms passed in her memory. On the other hand, Noor's case stands as an outlier, a rare instance of justice, or an example of systemic bias, depending on who you ask. The case raised difficult questions. Would a white officer have been convicted in the same situation? Is justice being applied equally? What reforms have actually emerged from this tragedy? In the wake of Justine's killing and Noor's conviction, the Minneapolis Police Department initiated modest reforms, including changes in body camera usage, de-escalation training, and policy reviews on use of force. But broader reforms stalled. The Noor case did not usher in the systemic overhaul some had hoped for. In the Somali-American community, many still feel Noor was used as a scapegoat, a sacrificial lamb offered up by a system eager to show it could hold a cop accountable, just not one who looked like most of its officers. Noor, now a civilian without his badge, has kept a low profile. His career in law enforcement is over, his future uncertain. As for Don Damond, he remains an advocate for peace and accountability. In an emotional interview, he once said, "I don't want Justine to be remembered for how she died, but for how she lived, with compassion, courage, and love." And so we close another chilling chapter in the Death Row Diaries, one that didn't end with a lethal injection or a last meal, but instead with a courtroom and a conviction that raised more questions than answers. Mohamed Noor's story is one of broken trust, shattered lives, and a justice system caught between accountability and disparity. Was it justice? Was it politics, or was it both? We'll leave that for you to decide. If this story made you think, shocked you, or opened your eyes, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Death Row Diaries, and tap the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the most controversial and disturbing cases on death row. Got thoughts on this case? Drop them in the comments below. We're reading every single one.